Good morning, everyone. This is Thykattil. Thanks for coming in this morning. I'm really enjoying the weather here in beautiful, sunny Santa Clara, California. I just came in from Chicago the other day, and it was nearly 50 degrees there. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad a lot of you have come in early this morning to hear this talk on cloud computing playbook for a business-driven approach. Again, I'm Joe Thykattil. Just a little bit of a background. I'm a technology architect uh, and sales uh, at Time Warner Navisite, and I wanted to give you a little bit of background on me. Before this role, I'm relatively new to this role. I was infrastructure manager for many years, as well as a hands-on software engineer, as well as an operations and systems administration and technology architect for previous companies in Chicago, primarily the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, uh, large futures exchange based in Chicago, as well as a few hedge funds, Citadel, as well as DRW Trading. And then I've done a few consulting gigs over at a few of the local banks, ABN AMRO, etc. So here's the agenda. We're going to talk about cloud desktops as a business enabler. IT as a service industry, and I'm going to compare it to what we do most mornings, at least a lot of us, when we go get our morning coffee. And then I'm going to dig into the meat of this discussion, which is examples around, how do you view all of this technology from a financial lens, specifically around TCO, total cost of ownership, ROI, return on investment analysis, from the point of view of the customer. And then lastly, I'm going to close with how do you go about making this type of decision, which is repeatable and valid and verifiable, not only by yourself, but by others who are looking at the information. So cloud desktops as business. So if you look at this slide around the tipping points that have occurred, we know our traditional IT desktops on the left, which are, expensive, support heavy, and insecure. And on the right, internal IT, is faced with multiple projects, multiple pressures and constraints, some internal, some external. Some of these are migration to another operating system, for example, Windows 7, increasing mobility access, tighter IT budgets, and of course, the ongoing security threats. And none of these will go away, but you need to be able to manage them in a more cost-effective manner going forward. And the way that you do that is to enable yourself with the latest technology in the desktop space. Here are some details. A few of them are, the top one there on mindset and adoption is really key because a lot has changed in terms of the mindset. I mean, it used to be all of us who are in IT, we remember the days when we would discover technology, at the office, and then we would take that home and show it to our family and friends. Now that trend is occurring in the opposite direction. People discover technology at home or with their friends, and they bring it into the office expecting internal IT will be able to support them. And that is the whole BYOD, bring your own device phenomena that's occurring and is driving that forward. Just a show of hands, I know a lot of you have seen this, primarily from executives. How many of you have seen corporate executives come into the office with their Apple laptops, etc., iPads, what have you, and say, hey, I'm going to bring this in, and you all in IT, you're going to have to figure out how to support it. Exactly. That's exactly what happens. And I see from the show of hands, a lot of you are familiar with that. And the barriers, cost being the large one right there with 67%. Costs are high, right? The hardware, as well as the labor, security is ongoing, reliability, as well as other factors. So let's grab a couple of experiences. I'll just tell you one experience that I had. I stayed at a hotel not too far in San Francisco, maybe in third week, late August. and I was preparing a last minute update to a slide deck, and I went into the business center at the hotel, and I noticed a couple of Mac desktops, but I was using PowerPoint and I wanted a Windows system. And it turns out the Mac that's there is really just an endpoint. What's being delivered over the network is either a Mac desktop or a Windows desktop, depending on what you pick. So you can go in there as a user, as a consumer of this service, and you can choose what desktop you want to, pay for and subscribe to and use going forward. And that's key because you're paying on a sort of an OpEx model, meaning you're paying for the drink, you're paying for what's happening right now. In terms of if you use 10 minutes, you get charged for 10 minutes. If you use an hour, you get charged for an hour. You don't get charged for the whole cost of the desktop, the licenses, etc. So I found this interesting that even a hotel like that is enabling cloud computing on their desktops in their business center. And I see this as well. I see children in grade schools are using, multiple cloud desktop opportunities with Google Apps, Google Desktops. All of this is getting very, very familiar early on in the educational system. And as these children move into the workforce, all of this is going to come to fruition, meaning all of this is going to come to IT being enabled to support this type of information and this type of technology. So let me just compare this, just do a quick comparison of IT as a service industry, and let's compare it to the experience that we are all familiar with when we go into a coffee shop. Before I proceed, I just want to ask you any questions so far? Okay, great. So this is just my little take on humor. A lot of us know that in order to support technology, you don't need to understand the underlying circuits, right? There are many technologists out there who are very familiar with technology without knowing the underlying circuit theory. So here's what we learned from the consumerization of IT. Ease of use is key, right? That's an expectation. It's not like a requirement, meaning it's not an overt requirement, it's just an expectation. And if you don't have that, consumers will go elsewhere for their services. And you shouldn't need to be Steve Jobs to understand computing, right? You shouldn't need to be an expert. This is highly commoditized these days and highly consumer ready. So here's the typical scenario. You are enjoying your morning cup of coffee while you check, your very, very, very important emails. And this is critical, and all of us know this, that emails are always checked continuously by everybody on their laptops, their phones, etc. And you're greeted really friendly, and people are there to help you, right? And you're paying for the coffee, the cup of coffee that you're buying. And then you sit at a table, perhaps, right? But they don't ask you, oh, well, you're sitting at this table. Can you pay for using the table? They don't ask you that, do they? And do they ask you to pay for the coffee maker, like capital expenditures or a fractional component of the capital expenditure? No, they do not ask you that. Do they ask you to pay for the salary of the staff? Like, we need, zero point 0.1 FTE to support you coming in here every day for your coffee. Nope, they do not ask you. Because if they did, you'd go crazy, right? This would be the reaction that you'd have. So here's what we're talking about, right? We're comparing coffee houses with how traditional IT is operated for many, many years, right? So firm grasp of these enablers can be transformational, meaning like it's not about the technology per se, but it's more a mind frame change. And that's the key that you want to drive forward is simplifying the desktop to a consumption model, as opposed to IT saying, here's what you use, and we determine what you use. Consumers determine what they use, and we as IT support them because we want to enable them to drive the overall business so they're more productive going forward. And in the end, that helps drive the business in terms of how it's transformational, in terms of its end product, and profits and sales. So let's get into the heart of the matter in terms of, how do you go about looking at this from a financial perspective? And that's really the key piece of this talk this morning. So on the left, you see here at the top, PCs, VDI was the next stage in the evolution, and now we've come to DAS, right? So you can see the costs, right? And you can see IT labor is a significant portion of the cost. There are some differences in terms of, training, desktop maintenance, etc., network engineering. Those costs are in play and are variable, but the largest piece, as you can see, is in the purple in the slide here, is IT labor. The more you shift the support of your system to a provider, the less internal IT labor you need, right? You're paying for large economies of scale from a provider that does this type of work really efficiently in a large scale. And that's the driving factor here. So why don't more firms sort of cross this chasm, so to speak, and adopt VDI and DAS? Here's another version of that same physical laptop. You can see, in terms of DAS, 360 base cost, 348 for the laptop as well. Very comparable, right? But the large portion of physical laptops are in terms of the labor component. Any questions so far? All right, gentlemen in back. Okay, so I think the question is, can you give us an example of something specific here? Okay. I will just tell you in terms of my background, I've seen this scenario in terms of labor. And I used to work for a large power company, energy company based in Chicago. And it was not uncommon for refresh life cycles of laptops and desktops to take multiple years and have whole departments, huge teams of 50 to 70 people dedicated to the refresh project, separate from the internal IT help desk team. All this team did was refresh the groupings of laptops and desktops year after year after year. Large labor costs. These are millions and millions of dollars over multiple years. So I can verify this from my own experience. There are large labor capital expenditures that are associated with this type of scenario supporting a physical laptop. And with this graph, I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but all I wanted to show you is primarily the graph. So at the top of the graph, you'll see that there's the total, right, in a light blue. And at the bottom, or sort of in the middle in the red, you'll see there's cloud desktop. So there's the baseline cost for cloud desktop and your internal costs. And the key here being your internal costs are going to drop as you enable more and more cloud adoption. But for a period there, maybe this is a 3-year recovery model that I use, but for a period there, you're going to have to support a mixed environment of both cloud and internal, right? And during that time, you might actually have an uptick in overall total costs, right? And that's what the light blue graph is showing there. So what you want to do is when you're justifying this and looking at this from a lens of cash flow and financial analysis, you want to look at the long-term view, right? Where you want to be 5 years from now, not where you want to be a year or 2 or 3 years from now, but more the long term. And you want to look at the total cost. And you see over the long term, the total costs do go down compared to the green, which is internal IT costs, right? And many companies will take a hybrid approach. You may not go fully cloud. You may go 90% cloud and maybe have 10 physical laptops for various, business or proprietary reasons. And that's individually determined by company. What you want to see here is the key theme is not the numbers, but the directional piece here, right? What I'm showing you with this graph is more of a directional nature of moving from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. Any questions? All right, the question is, how accurate are these numbers and how relevant? Okay, all right, I understand. So, I mean, these numbers are sort of estimates based on some open information from multiple providers of DAS as well as my own experiences. And what I'm really telling you is like, okay, not that a certain number up on this slide is, 211,788, but I want to show you directionally in terms of orders of magnitude and where you're going to go, right? So don't get hung up on the exact numbers. It's going to be different numbers for each company's environment. So each company is going to have to determine its own true internal costs, right? Some companies are more efficient than others. Some companies have multiple offices and data centers. It's going to be different based on the company, right? What you want to see is the trend and the directional nature here going forward. Great question. All right, so this is just another example, a detailed example of cloud adoption, and this is from an experience I had that I've shared where I was involved in a project where we looked at streaming media, essentially, streaming media for our internal and external websites. And we took a traditional approach where we hosted the streaming media ourselves in our own data centers. And here I have an example of cloud at the top there. And I know this is an eye chart, apologies for that, but I wanted to show you is not necessarily the numbers or anything like that, because a lot of this is kind of been massaged in terms of the metrics, etc. But I wanted to show you in terms of ballpark, in terms of that purple line in the graph, where it starts out a little bit about over 45K and goes down and meets cloud recovery in terms of a 3-year recovery model. And I want to show you that you might have, a data center in Chicago, a data center in Dallas, and this is a fictitious company that I made up, ABC Corp, where we looked, and it's related to a specific project that I worked on, but I wanted to show you directionally. Here's the example where you have some recovery model, which then goes down over time, and that is really the beauty of the environment. Is that it allows you to go to a fixed cost pricing and to a lower cost pricing. You don't have to worry about the refreshes. All of those server refreshes, the hardware infrastructure refreshes are taken care of behind the scenes. And what the visual allows you to see, allows your internal stakeholders to see is the progression of this project, this adoption to cloud, and how that's saving financial resources that could be put to bear elsewhere on other projects. So in addition to the savings in terms of finances, the opportunity costs that are gained or opportunity benefits that are gained from allocating those resources elsewhere are tremendous. Here's a decision matrix example in terms of how do you put that information up on for display for people to look at? What is your thought process? How do you look at your thought process? And here's one example of a piece of software that I use on my iPad. Is called Mind Genius, but basically it's a mind mapping tool. It allows you to look at, okay, for this type of example or project, you can look at, what is your current state? What are the costs right now internally? Does your current state meet, current needs by your internal customers or external customers? Are those positive, negative, or the security implications? And then you go to your future state and look at those options as well as strategic advantages, right? Then you want to do a comparative analysis, and you want to also look at comparative financial analysis, because eventually you'll find that all of these will flow into comparative analysis that involves some information around, what are the financial benefits, and if the financial costs are higher, what are the advantages, right? What are the strategic advantages? It could be that maybe due to a merger and acquisitions activity, you might want to move towards, a model that's, more towards an OPEX model, where you may not be sure in 6 months to 9 months from now that that's the environment that you need, right? You might have, just a very basic stance of, the new environment costs more because it's providing more features, right? That's pretty simple to understand. And then you may want to also allow a shift. And I think this is the strategic advantage of moving to cloud is you may want to move your workers from more an operational focus to more of a knowledge strategic architecture focus going forward, helping drive strategy and the business strategy going forward. So that's a decision you have to make internally as a company. And then, when you make that type of decision, you find that you actually attract more talent going forward. And that also sends a signal to the market, letting them know that you're a company that wants to invest in new technology because you want to grow and drive strategy going forward. Here's a decision matrix that I came up with, and it's essentially, there's four main pillars there, and each of those you can kind of think of as a gating uh, environment. You go through each of these, and you go through the structure of looking at, okay, does it pass through? Does it fall through? And if all of these fall through, you move to cloud, right? And this is just an example. This example will become specific to each company. It has to be custom tailored in some ways. This is a framework, but you can kind of look at different gatings, different stakeholders that you have to pass through to gain a cloud adoption internally, right? And that makes for a successful project, adoption of cloud. Questions so far? So the question around analysis, yes, the TCO analysis does come into play, and on the left, that and also in the third column from the left, those are both there as well. So those are available both in the application readiness that I have here and vendor selection, right? Because there might be multiple cloud providers that you're looking to, potentially host your environment, and these are different sort of gatings that you can go through. Great question. And what are cloud providers doing right now? And I just wanted to give you a couple examples. One is cloud providers are giving information on profiling tools, right? Like this one is a example of one. And there are many ones out there on the internet. They ask you a couple questions, you answer the questions, and they give you sort of like, okay, here's where you are as a company, as a firm, in terms of your evolution. In addition to that, there are very, obvious calculators out there that tell you, oh, well, you want to host a server that runs Windows with this many CPUs and memory, etc., and the data center location, this is how much it's going to cost. Pretty straightforward. So these are your external costs to host in the cloud. The details will be more around, and where you'll spend, I find is where you spend a lot of time, and what customers find is they spend a lot of time determining what are their true internal costs. And being faithful and a good faith effort towards that discovery, that level of discovery is really what will enable you to determine what's the best option. Do you go to cloud 100%? Do you stay internal, or do you adopt some type of hybrid approach? And very likely you will most likely start out with a hybrid approach, and that's usually the best, and potentially a pilot approach. So in summary, I just wanted to review here. We've gone through the meat of the project here, the talk today, this morning at Cloud Expo, and it's based around a financial analysis of the environment, and what is the availability of services and the move towards a consumption model. And inherent to that is the fact that you're dealing with a provider that has the economies of scale, as well as all the resources that make up that economy of scale to handle all the risks, supports, and the security inherent, where you don't have to take those upfront capital expenditures to make those assessments, those mitigations, and those investment in infrastructure and services. All right, I just want to thank you everyone for coming in this morning at Cloud Expo. I really enjoyed my time here at Cloud Expo in Silicon Valley and Santa Clara. And again, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions, or after the talk, feel free to come by. Thank you.